So welcome everybody. Welcome to this week's our seminar. It's a great pleasure to see you all here, and we have a fantastic speaker and a great talk coming up. I'll just remind you of how things work here, if you've been here before and if you're here for the first time. So the talk will take approximately 45 minutes, after which there'll be a question and discussion session. Also, please, we encourage you to keep your video on during the talk and afterwards. If you would like to ask a question during the talk, which is something that we strongly encourage, then please raise your hands. So there is if you go to the participants menu, there's an option to raise your hand. And I will then interrupt Javier and you get to ask a question. So the talk is being recorded, so your question will be recorded if you choose to ask it during the talk. And then of course we'll have additional questions at the end. So we've had some problems, especially me. I've been unlucky enough to have some problems with people trying to disrupt proceedings in the past. So if you notice anything strange going on, please, the chat is actually disabled, but you can still send me messages. So if you notice something fishy going on, then please let me know and I'll try to deal with it. But I think for now, without further ado, I think I'll hand the floor over to Javier and he'll tell us about an efficient normalization procedure for linear temporal logic. Please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, okay, so thank you very much, in particular for being there on August 12th. So I'd like to talk about normal forms for linear temporal logic, so normalization procedure for linear temporal logic. So this is joint work with Salomon Sickert, and notice the order of authors. So also in the paper, which was presented at LIX 20, Salomon goes first because he's really the main author of this paper. So I collaborated a bit, but the main ideas are really his. So, or maybe before starting in that slide, let me just kind of give you a teaser. So we all know that normal forms are important in logic, right? So we all know the conjunctive normal form for propositional logic, or the Brennex and the Skolem normal forms for first order logic. And we know that they are important both in theory and in practice. So there are algorithms which can only work if we can only work for certain normal forms, and also the tools implement these normal forms. And actually a lot of effort is invested into producing the most compact normal form possible and things like that. And what I want to argue here is that if we now move to temporal logic, normal forms are important there. There was also work in the past about it, but actually it stopped halfway. So it stopped at the theoretical part, and actually, as I will claim later, it has had no impact whatsoever on tools. And I think that's very wrong, and that's just because we were not able as a community in the mid-80s, in the early 90s, when these things were happening, to take the next step. And now this paper is suggesting that, okay, at least 25 years later, right? Or no, 35 years later, but we have to take it now. Okay, so let's see. Let's see. So the story starts in the mid-80s, and it starts with this paper by Lichtenstein, Pnueli, and Zak, and also the PhD thesis of Zak. And what they shown there is that every formula of linear temporal logic containing future operators and past operators is equivalent to a formula of this form. So you can see it's a big conjunction of formulas of the form GF phi I and FG psi I, where phi I and psi I contain only past operators. Okay, so what we are doing is showing that the future operators, the nesting of these future operators can be restricted to 2. And in fact, this was part of a larger program which was conducted specifically by Mana and Pnueli, in particular, for example, in this paper, where what they were doing is to analyze properties, the properties that you can express in linear temporal logic, right? Giving semantic definitions of different kinds of properties and deriving both syntactic characterizations, saying, well, every formula, every property of this kind can be expressed by a formula of this shape, right? As well as specific verification procedures for these specific classes. So they were introducing these classes like safety properties, warranty properties, and so on, up to reactivity properties, right? And then what they did was to characterize syntactically which were the formulas expressing those properties. And what they showed is that this class, the reactivity class, you don't have to go further. So this reactivity class is already so that it contains all formulas, sorry, all properties that can be expressed in linear temporal logic, okay? So if a formula belongs semantically to a level in the hierarchy, I'm not giving you the semantic definition, then there exists an equivalent formula that syntactically belongs to the fragment. And, you know, so this is, as you can see, 1990, the automata theoretic approach to model checking had started with in the mid-80s with the work of Bardi and Volper. And as a consequence, actually, and also because it was already known that LTL with past operators was equivalent to LTL without past operators, so that you don't really need the past operators, right? And also since the translations between linear temporal logic and automata were actually for the future fragment, right? The interest was focusing on the future fragment. And that's why a couple of years later, right, then there was a final paper, the final paper in this line of papers by Chang, Mana, and Pnueli, which I want to introduce the result, but in order to do that, I need some preliminaries. I need this. So in order to introduce that result, I have first to fix a syntax for the standard LTL, and we are going to take this one, which is a bit non-standard, but I'll tell you, you will see in a second why we take this one. So first notice that it is a syntax in negation normal form, so you only see negation before an atomic proposition. And interestingly, notice that we have both the strong until and the weak until operator. Okay, so until, remember, it means that phi, let's say if this is phi 1 and this is phi 2, this means that phi 1 holds until phi 2 holds, and phi 2 has to hold at some point in the future. And the weak until is phi 1 holds until phi 2 holds, but it may be the case that phi 2 does never holds. Okay, that's the difference between the strong and the weak until. And so with this syntax, you can define the alternation hierarchy, which is given, so in order to see which is the level of a formula in this alternation hierarchy, you count the number of alternations between strong untils and weak untils in the path of the syntax tree. And this gives you a hierarchy whose first levels are like this. The notation is borrowed from the usual notation for the polynomial time hierarchy. So for example, this class sigma 1 means that you see essentially 0 alternations and you only see until operators. So here you only see untils, okay? You can see many untils nested, but you will not see any alternation between until and weak until. Pi 1 is the other class, but with weak instead of a strong until. Delta 1 is the union of sigma 1 and pi 1. So for example, this formula is there because here you have one until, here you have one weak until, depending which path in the syntax tree you choose, and so on, right? So you can, and delta 2 in particular means that you can see at most one alternation. So in all paths, you will either see until, weak until, or weak until, but you will never see 2 alternations, okay? In particular, you will never see F, and then a G, and then again an F, or vice versa, or a G and F, and then again a G. And of course, in particular, the hierarchy goes on. But you know, when you see these 2 pictures, you can already try to guess which is the result that was proved by Chang, Mana, and Pnueli in 92, which was, yes, that these 2 hierarchies coincide. Okay, so in particular, this means that this reactivity class, where notice, remember that this PI and this QI are formulas with past operators, right? They are not atomic propositions. What you are saying is that every reactivity property can be expressed like this with PI and QI formulas with only past operators. What they show is that this is the same class as delta 2 in the future fragment where you don't have any past operator at all. Okay, so this is the result that was proved in that paper. Okay, so as I said, so these results, they have had a large theoretical impact. So probably many of you have seen the book by Mana and Prunelli, where they describe all this really in very large detail. And if you want to see historically which impact all this work has had in later works, so you can look at the chapter by Peterman and Prunelli in the handbook of model checking. But now my claim is that this has had zero impact in tools. I don't think you will be able to point me to a tool which is using any kind of normal form for LTL. And the reason is very clear. The reason is that the translations, these three translations that I have presented to you, translations of arbitrary formulas in temporal logic into formulas in the normal form, so these normalization procedures, they all have non-elementary worst case complexity. There are some other stuff which can be triple exponential or things like that in the literature, but horrible. And moreover, they are highly indirect. So it's not that you take, it's not like the conjunctive normal form, right, where you apply a couple of syntactic rules, right, and go directly from formulas to formulas. Here, you go from a formula to an automaton, then you go from an automaton to a star-free regular expression, and then you go from a star-free regular expression to another formula. So actually nobody, as far as I know, has ever cared to implement this. And it's a pity because this is the result that we prove in our leaks paper. We give a new normalization procedure which is direct, so there is no detour. It is syntax guided again, so it is completely syntactic. So you don't have to know which is the semantic of LTL in order to be able to apply the procedure, right? And moreover, it's single exponential. And in fact, as we will see later, maybe I should mention it before I forget to mention, because sometimes I forget to mention this. And this is only an upper bound. We think that is going to be the lower bound as well, but even that there we don't have a proof. This could still be polynomial. So the length of a formula in delta 2 normal form, right, with at most one alternation, is at most exponential in the length of the original formula. Good. So the rest of the talk is about telling you how this normalization procedure looks like. And in order to tell you, I mean, the distinctive thing of this is that if you go to the leaks paper, you will see that the leaks paper is essentially self-contained. Everything is there. And all proofs are just relatively straightforward structural proofs by structural induction. So the only difficulty here is not in the proofs, it is in the definitions. It is to come up with some notions that allow you to define this normal form, okay? And these two notions, the main two notions that we need are a very specific way of partitioning the universe of all words, of all possible words on which you can interpret a given formula, okay? And moreover, the second ingredient is the notion of stable words that also plays an important technical role. In the end, the stable words disappear, but it's a very important auxiliary notion that allows us to do a first step and then to continue with the second step, producing the final result. So let's start with this idea of how to partition. You know, we fix a set of atomic proposition, right? And then we have an alphabet, which is given by the power set of the set of atomic propositions. And we interpret our formulas on omega words over this alphabet, right? So, and then given a formula 5, the formula phi is fixed, right? We have it in front of us. And we want to look at the universe of all words through the eyes of phi. So imagine you are the formula and you are looking at this, right? This is going to lead to a partitioning of the set of all words. So, So this is sigma omega, right? And then we are going to partition. And how are we going to partition? Well, let us introduce the definition. Take a word W, okay? And consider the U subformulas, the until subformulas of phi. And then, you know, this word is infinite, right? And then you consider a subformula, let's say psi. And now you look at how often does psi hold along W. Okay, meaning, well, does it hold here at this point? Does it hold here at this point? Does it hold here? And by holding here at this point, I mean, of course, that this suffix of the word satisfies the until subformula. Okay. So we'll look at this pattern of when at which positions the until subformula holds and which positions it doesn't. And then in particular, we just focus on only one thing, whether it holds infinitely often or not. Okay. And then we define this GF, which has W and phi as parameters, right, as the set of U subformulas of phi that are true infinitely often along W. And similarly, let me maybe erase this, right? And similarly, we define FG W phi. We do the same. I mean, we do the kind of dual thing for the W subformulas, right? We look at the W subformulas, at the weak until subformulas, and then we look at which ones are not infinitely often, but almost always along W. That's why we call this FG, okay? Which ones are almost always true along W. Now you may think that this definition looks a bit arbitrary, and then there is a more symmetric way of defining this. And if you think a little bit about it, probably after the talk, it's better to do it after the talk, you will see that the other possibilities that you might think of do not make much sense. This is the only sensible definition, right? And but it's better to define it in this less symmetrical way for some technical reasons which are not too important. Anyway, so now imagine that I give you two sets M and N. The set M has mu subformula, has until subformulas, and the set N has weak until subformulas of the formula, right? Then this induces a set of words, P, M, N, phi. These are the set of words such that the formulas that hold infinitely often, right, along W are the formulas in M, and the formulas that hold almost always along W are the formulas in N. So in a sense, what happens is that you want for each choice of M and N, you take a box where you put all the formulas, right, such that the ones that are the U subformulas that hold, so you put there, sorry, all the words, right? You put there the words such that the mu subformulas that hold infinitely often are the ones in M, and the W subformulas that hold almost always are those in N. And this defines the partition, right? So this means that this is, for example, an element of the partition for two sets M1, N1. If your sets are M1 and N2, then that gives you another element, M3, N4, and so on. And of course, some of these, actually, some of these sets might be empty. Good, let me just give you an example, which should make things more clear. So imagine that we take this formula, GA or B until C. Our alphabet is 2 to the ABC, right? And then which are the U subformulas? There is only one, B until C. Which are the W subformulas? Only GA, okay? So this means that we only have two possible choices for the set M. It is either the empty set or the set containing only the formula B until C. And there are only two possibilities for N, either the empty set or the set containing only GA, right? So we are going to have 4 elements in the partition, okay? Which are P empty set, B until C empty set GA, or B until C GA. And for example, this is a word that belongs here. Why? Because this is telling us that B until C holds infinitely often. And indeed, that's something satisfied by this word, right? In this word, B until C holds infinitely often because of this C here. And that GA holds also almost always, and is true. It doesn't hold right at the beginning, but starting at the second position, it holds always, okay? So it is a word that belongs there. And for example, this word belongs here. And why? Because B until C does not hold infinitely often. It only holds once at the beginning, but then never again, right? And GA does not hold almost always. In fact, it never holds, okay? And you can continue, you know, doing things, adding words and partitioning words in this way. Okay, so now we are done with the first idea, with the first thing that we have to worry about, which is this partition. Hopefully we are all, now we all understand this partition. And now the second point, which is important, is which are the stable words. This is going to be a subset of all words. And so when is a word stable? Well, the idea is that imagine that you take an until subformula. And it can hold infinitely often or finitely often. If it holds finitely often, it might hold 0 times, 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. The idea is that a word is stable, or one of the two conditions for the word to be stable is that it holds either infinitely often or never. So it is 0 or infinitely often, okay? And similarly for the W subformulas, the W subformulas that we are interested in whether they hold almost always or not. And then the word is stable if they hold almost always, sorry, if they hold always or never, okay? There is also nothing in between, like, yeah, it does not hold for the 3 first steps and then it holds, right? So it's either, there is nothing like a natural number different from 0 here. So the number of times the until subformulas hold cannot be 3, and the number of times the W subformulas do not hold cannot be 2 or 4. That's the idea. And in particular, for example, this word is not stable because B until C, this subformula, right, holds once. It doesn't hold infinitely often or 0, but just once. But for example, this one is stable because here B until C holds infinitely often. And GA holds always, right? So, and then the important thing that you have to remember, will be used later, is that not every word is stable, but every word has a stable suffix. And why it is simpler, it is not difficult to see. Imagine that an until subformula holds 3 times. Then as you move along the word, right, at some point the until subformula will only hold 2 times, and then only once, and then at some point 0 times, and then you will be in the stable range, right? So every word is going to have a stable suffix. Okay, so then how are we going to use these two notions, the partitioning and the stable words, in order to obtain a normal form, okay, or a normalization procedure? So, well, we're going to use contextual equivalence. So 2 formulas are equivalent if they have the same language, okay? Then you can define what does it mean for 2 formulas to be equivalent in the context of a language L, which we are going to denote like this, right? And we denote it like this. So the 2 formulas have the same language within L, okay, respective to L. When we have L as window and we only see the things in L. And then, you know, if we have a formula rho, which has a language L rho, then we can also say when are 2 formulas equivalent with respect to a third formula. And this will be the case if they are equivalent with respect to the language of that third formula. Good, so how can we use this? So imagine that we have a partitioning of the set of all words by formulas. So this means that every word will satisfy at least one of the formulas, okay? And imagine that we are able to find formulas psi1, psi n, which are equivalent to phi for each of these row 1 to row n, okay, in the scope of each of these. So the idea is that I look at row 1 and here I see that phi is equivalent to psi 1. I look at row 2, okay, here phi is equivalent to psi 2, and so on. Then it is a little exercise to see that phi is equivalent to this formula. Because the idea is that this is telling you that, you know, because when you are within, when row I holds, right, then you are equivalent to phi if psi 1 holds. That's the idea. And this disjunction tells you that, well, you are always going to be in one of these areas. Good. So this is what we are going to use. And then in the next slides, what we are going to do is first to give a normal form for stable words, for the set of stable words. It only works for stable words. And this is actually work that we had already done a couple of years ago, just not presented it in this way because who cares about stable words, right? But then we are going to be able to get rid of the constraint to stable words, to the restriction to stable words, and that's what makes the result then interesting. So this is the very important proposition that we are going to use in order to derive essentially everything else. So now we put ourselves inside the set of stable words, okay? And then we can assume that we are, you know, this is the set of stable words. And now we assume that we are also within one of the equivalence classes of the partitioning. We are now looking at this box and only at the color area. These are the stable words, right? Then we can show that there phi is equivalent to this formula, which is with the formula I am going to define now. Okay, and the important thing is that this formula is incredibly easy to obtain from phi. So it's nothing complicated. It's really a trivial thing. So you have to look at this to understand the notation. This means this is the result of applying an operation that I am going to define. The operation depends on m. That's why you see the m there. And these two indices, right, this pi1, is there only to remind you that the result, the formula I obtain, is going to be a formula in the pi1 fragment. Okay? And now how do I obtain this formula from phi? So here is the recipe. I replace every u subformula, which is in M, by this subformula. So I make the u, I turn the strong until into a weak until. Those for the until subformulas which are in M, right? And for those which are not in M, I replace the subformula by false. So as you can see, it's a completely syntactic operation. It's very easy. It doesn't blow up the formula. In fact, it can only reduce the size of the formula. Okay? Good. So now you may think, where the hell is this coming from? Or how can this be true? Let me give you the intuition of why is this true. So imagine that you have the formula FA and GB. And imagine that the set M contains FA. You have to think about this in the following way. So imagine that now you are given a word and you want to know whether that word satisfies this formula or not. And the idea is that I am giving you some extra information. I am telling you, and by the way, the formula FA holds infinitely often. So if I tell you the formula FA holds for this word infinitely often, then you know that essentially, intuitively, you can replace FA by true. Okay, and this is actually what you do. You replace, this is formula, of course you have to write this as true until A, and then you apply the replacement, the syntactic replacement here. This is going to give you true weak until A, but this is true. Okay, so what it tells you is that what you obtain is the formula GB. Now imagine that we have this formula, right, again, And now I tell you, okay, what is the information I am giving you by telling that M is empty, the empty set? Well, first I am telling you that that FA does not hold infinitely often. And remember that we are talking about stable words. This means I am telling you actually that FA never holds. If I am telling you that FA never holds, then how are you going to make this formula hold? Well, it's impossible. So we have that this formula there is equivalent to false. Okay? And now consider this case, consider the formula G A until B. And I give you the additional information. By the way, A until B holds infinitely often for this word. Then you can replace, you know that G A until B is going to hold if and only if G A weak until B holds. Because, you know, by telling you that A until B holds infinitely often, I am in particular telling you that B holds infinitely often, right? So then in this case, what you get is G A WB. By the way, this is, well, it's also G A, but just take this one. And the important thing you see is that here I have an alternation between W and U, and here I have got rid of this alternation. So the important thing is that this operation is going to eliminate the alternations. Okay? So this is the fundamental idea. Using this fundamental idea, we can already derive a normal form valid only for stable words. This is what this thing here means, right? And how do you obtain the normal form? Well, it's the trick I told you before. We are going to have a disjunction over all possible sets M of until subformulas and all possible sets N of weak until subformulas, right? And then we are going to have here these formulas telling us that we are in this equivalence class, that you know that the formulas of M hold infinitely often and the formulas of N hold almost always. This is what this is telling us, right? So this means we are within the equivalence class. And then there we know that when we are there, we know that phi is equivalent to this. Okay? So this is it. This gives us the equivalence, sorry, the normal form for stable words. Okay. Sorry, and then no, not quite, because I always forget that I shouldn't go so quickly, because you know actually this is not true. And why is this not true? Well, because you know I cannot still guarantee you that this is going to be in delta 2. And why not? Because I'm not telling you anything about this formula psi. These psi are just the until subformulas of phi. And the until subformulas of phi could be anything. Okay, oh, sorry, yeah. They could be anything. So this is still not in delta 2. But now, you know, there is this little miracle that happens, which is not really difficult to prove, but it's still a kind of a little miracle, which says that I can replace here this psi by this formula. I can also eliminate the alternations here, and I am not destroying the equivalence. Okay, so this is then the final form. And now notice, by definition, right, this is going to be a formula in sigma 1. This here is a formula in pi 1. Therefore, when I put the GF in front, this is going to be a formula in pi 2. This is here a formula in sigma 2. This here is a formula in pi 1. This means the whole thing is then a formula in delta 2. Okay, so let me get rid of all this red stuff so that you can appreciate this in all this glory. So this is the result, very nice result for stable words. And of course, the only problem is that nobody cares about the stable words, right? It's not the case that the stable words have really any important application or would be interesting by themselves. And that's why, even though we had this result in essentially in 2018, we didn't care to put it in this way because it was not good for anything. So now the problem is now how to get rid of this. And this is what is done in the Leaks paper in 2020. We are able to obtain a normal form for arbitrary words. And I am going to wave my hands quite a bit from this point on. Of course, I've already done it quite a bit, but now even more, right? So the problem is that, in fact, I even made a typo here. In fact, the problem is that these equivalences which hold when we are in the realm of stable words, when we have this here, they are no longer true when we eliminate this. And here is a particular example, and of course I am not going to ask to expect that you understand all this mambo jumbo, right? It's quite heavy notationally, but this is only there to make clear to you that you don't have to construct a very complicated phi to violate this. So if you just take the formula GA, then you will have that GA, when you restrict yourself to the stable words, will be equivalent to true for this in this equivalence class. But if you remove the part concerning the stable words, it will no longer be equivalent to true. And I am going to interpret what this and this is saying for you. So this one is saying, if almost every suffix of a stable word satisfies GA, then the word satisfies GA. And this is the case for stable words, because in a stable word, if every suffix satisfies the word, then all suffixes satisfy the word. This is the definition of a stable word, right? But the latter is saying that if every suffix of an arbitrary word satisfies GA, then the word satisfies GA. And that's of course false. For example, take the word BA, right? BA does not satisfy A everywhere, but it satisfies it almost everywhere. So that's essentially the problem we have. And now how can we overcome this problem? In fact, the solution I think is quite elegant. In fact, the solution is here. Essentially, all you have to do is apply this Ltl equivalence, which is an equivalence which usually you don't see actually at all. It's not one that is usually mentioned when you are describing Ltl, because it's kind of trivial, right? But it's extremely important in this case. And why? Well, because what is the semantics of until? This is telling you there exists a k, a number k, such that phi holds for the first k positions, right? Until g phi holds for the rest. And now the interesting thing is that for this particular formula, phi until g phi, you can take any k. Any k works, right? When you want to define what's the semantics of this, you are going to say there exists a k, but you can take any k, an arbitrary k. So the intuitive idea is that in particular, you can always choose the k so that you are already in the stable part of the word. Remember, every word has a stable suffix. So you take the k in the long enough or large enough so that you are already in the stable suffix. And this allows you to derive this equivalence. Tell you that g phi is equivalent to this. So here in the second part, here you are able to introduce this, to replace phi by this formula without alternations. Okay? That's the intuitive idea. And remember, observe that there is no mention of stable words here anymore. The stable words have disappeared from the picture. Now, by doing that, I have written too much, so I have to erase a little bit. And and this was a bit too fast. So by applying this idea, and I'm not telling you how exactly, right now I'm waving my hands. By applying this idea, you can define a second formula, which now remember, this is going to be a formula in sigma 2, no longer a formula in pi 1. It's going to be a formula in sigma 2. And how do you define it? Well, now it's a little bit more complicated. Remember that before we were just replacing untils by weak untils or there was a dual case, weak untils by untils, but don't worry about that, right? Now, what we do is a little bit more complicated. What we apply actually is this transformation, okay? Where we notice that this is the old stuff. So this is the old algorithm that we had, right? So we have now to continue applying the transformation here, but here now we do not construct, we do not apply this new transformation, we only have to apply the old one. And for all other cases, what you say is that, for example, the case of a conjunction is that what is the result of applying the procedure to a conjunction? It is the result of applying the procedure to both conjuncts and taking the conjunction. It's the same for disjunction, and the same for next, and the same for negation, and everything. All those cases are defined homomorphically. Okay, so this is the only really important point. Well, so once you have that, then this gives you the result. This was the normal form for stable words. This is the normal form that works in general. And what is the only difference? The only difference is that you go from here to there, and that you remove this here. That's it, okay? And now it is easy to see that the length of this is going to be exponential, because you know this is a set of these are sets of subformulas of phi. There are only exponentially many. This means there are only exponentially many disjuncts at worst. And then remember that this thing was not blowing up the formula. This thing may be blowing up the formula, but only exponentially. It's easy to see. So the whole thing is going to be only exponential. It's only going to have exponential length. Okay, so here you have an example. Here you have a formula where you have an F and then nested within it a G and then nested with it an F. So this formula is not in delta 2, and you can obtain a formula in delta 2 by, you know, you are only going to have two interesting cases here, this case and that case, even though in principle there are more, but for all other cases, the formulas that you are going to obtain are trivial, is true or false. And then in the end, you are going to end up, let me just skip the details because I've already spent quite a lot of time. You are going to obtain that phi, so that this formula here is equivalent to this. And there you no longer have this double nesting of untils and weak untils. You only have alternation depth 1. Okay, so at this, for example, compare this. This is what we obtain. This is the normal form that we would obtain for stable words, valid only for stable words. And notice that there is no until here, but the one for arbitrary words needs the until. Okay, good. So Pavel, do I have 5 more minutes or not?
I think we have about 2 minutes.
2 minutes, good. So then let me tell you, because now I am done, I could stop here. But of course you would ask probably, what is this good for? So, and I think this is going to be good for lots of things. But of course you have to give a proof of concept. And I can tell you already, this is good for translating LTL to deterministic raving automata. The classical way of doing this is to go from LTL to NBAs using the approach, the automata theoretic approach of Bardi and Volper, and then applying Safra's determinization procedure. But you all know that Safra's, or if you don't know now, believe me, Safra's construction is very tricky to implement efficiently. It's actually a pain in the ass. I know this is being recorded, but still, it is actually, you don't want to do that really, unless you really have to, right? I mean, there are people who do it, but and they are very clever and they do great things, but I would really hate to do that. So there have already been, that's why people have work, and we have work also, and Salomon in particular also has done a lot of work on direct translations from LTL to DRA, okay? And what we give in the paper is a translation which exploits the normal form. Because, you know, a way to translate LTL to DRA is to go through very weak alternating Bush automata. So you may know that it is possible to translate LTL formulas, and this is a syntactic translation, extremely easy, into very weak alternating Bush automata. Linear blow up, purely syntactic, everything is fine, right? The idea is that if you now normalize first, you go from a formula in LTL to a formula in delta 2. And now, if you apply the construction to those formulas, to formulas in delta 2, what you obtain is very weak alternating automata satisfying an additional condition. And it is the condition you would expect, that in every path in the automaton, there is at most one alternation between accepting and non-accepting states. Okay, so it's never the case that along a path in the automaton you start seeing non-accepting and then non-accepting states. So, and then that property allows you to transform the very weak alternating Bush automaton into a DRA using a much simpler construction, which is very well known in the automata world, which is the breakpoint construction. I'm not going to say anything about it, right? But the idea is that you only have to use this instead of the much more complicated Safra construction. And my 2 minutes, I think, probably are over. So let me just finish by saying, before this work, what we had were impractical, non-elementary normalization procedures for LTL. Now we have direct syntax-guided exponential normalization procedures for LTL. We don't know if there is a match in exponential nowhere bound. We conjecture it, but we don't know. We don't know about what to do with pass operators. And then, of course, now you can revisit your favorite result about LTL and see whether the fact that there is an efficient normalization procedure can help you. It may simplify your result. And that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to try to unmute everybody, although I don't see. Maybe if you can try.
I am unmute.
Well, now everybody can unmute himself or herself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I make a comment?
Let's thank Javier. Okay, so are there any questions? Please raise your hands.
I think Dov had a comment, right? I think, or?
I don't know. I don't see him. Has he raised his hand? I'll unmute him.
Oh.
Hello. So please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I wanted to make a comment. I mean, it's very interesting talk, very clear, and I'm excited about it. And I want to put forward maybe another possibility for application.
Great.
40 years ago, I proved what we call the separation theorem, which means if you, for many linear flows of time, if you have a formula with since and until, where future, past, and present all mixed up, it can be rewritten as a combination of a formula pure on the past, a formula on the present, and a formula on the future only.
Okay.
Then for a formula on the future and pure on the past and of the present, your procedure can work.
Okay.
Now, another theorem that has to do with natural language is that if you have what people do, the following two operators, you say this and this and this, this and then this and then this and then this, and all of this in the future.
Okay.
Or this and linear points, which are really f or p, and all of this in the past. If I give you just these operators, it's equivalent to since and until. In other words, full expressive power over the linear time.
Okay.
But then think, you iterate this. So you take a structure and put it in the future, again another structure in the future again, and then move the whole thing in the past, and then, okay?
Yep.
So this is f of f of f of f, or f of p of f of, but I think, again, a variation of your procedure works.
Okay.
But
so that
now,
would be great, of course. Yeah, so this
but
is, of course,
now-
what the question. Yeah.
yeah, never mind the complexity. It's the structure, how you rewrite it, that has to do with the way we look at different natural languages. Because
but yes, okay, but I must say I very much care about complexity. So I think that
Yes.
was our motivation for this, right? That was our motivation, that nobody had been using this actually in the,
No,
in
no,
the
I
tools
mean,
that translate LTL to automata, and which have applications in verification and synthesis.
no, I fully agree with that. That's in what is done in computer science. But
Yeah, right.
temporal logic is also in language, is also, and so there is, I tell you why I had to prove the second theorem, because it
Right.
came,
Yeah, sure.
it came from a religious university. They asked me, what language do they talk in heaven? I mean, God saw Adam and Eve, and he said, what are you doing? Why are you hiding? So what did they speak? And so some theologian says, Hebrew, that's the Bible. And others says, it's impossible. I mean, look at Russian. Russian has aspects and more aspects and more aspects. So what kind of language? I mean, God will not speak at a simple language. The thing is, all languages can push stories up and down, and therefore they're all equivalent anyway. So God was okay, as an example.
Okay. Thank you.
That was a fantastic comment. Thanks. Are there any other questions? Okay, maybe I have a slightly naive question. I just wanted you to, Javier, to comment a little bit on how you see this being used in tools. Sort of what which.
Oh, well, actually, you know, so actually we have been doing, working on translations of LTL to deterministic automata for quite a few years now. And in fact, that material is implemented. And it definitely beats Safra construction. So if I may become a bit philosophical, so, you know, I think that actually we made a mistake as a community, I mean, in the in the mid 80s, when the automata theoretic approach of Bardia and Volper came, we just forgot about LTL. We said, okay, LTL can be translated to automata, so we just only have to work with automata. But in fact, there is a price to pay, because Bücher automata are more expressive than LTL. And of course, this means that something like a normalization procedure or a determinization procedure may be more difficult for a language which is more expressive. But still, we didn't pay any attention to that. And now we see that actually that was true, right? If you restrict yourself to LTL, which is a perfectly reasonable class, it's perfectly reasonable to do, right? Because people are writing specifications in LTL anyway, most of the time. Some people will tell you, no, that's not the case, but I still believe that that's a perfectly reasonable specification language. Then you see that you obtain simpler procedures, right? And in fact, more efficient in practice. So in fact, we have already have a first implementation of this in practice. It's not going to be revolutionary with respect to what we had produced before. And why is that? Because, you know, we have obtained this result as at the end of a long process, right? Usually, I wish we would have obtained this result at the beginning when we were starting this long sequence of papers that started actually even in 2012, right? But that's life, right? I mean, we only make one step at a time. And this, I think, is really the most satisfactory result that we have produced. And from the point of view of the implementation, it's not very different, so different from the things we had before. So we have already shown that this works better than, for instance, Safra construction. This is more efficient. It leads to a smaller automata. This has been implemented. Salomon has implemented this in a synthesis tool, which is called Strix. And Strix has won straight the LTL category in the synthesis competition at CAP for 3 years. So this is already working. Right? It will, with this particular paper, if we are lucky, then we will even be able to simplify it a bit further. And definitely it is from the theoretical point of view, much, much nicer, but this is already working, right? For synthesis in particular. With, I think it can, it also has applications for probabilistic model checking. And I think it can have, it will also have applications. It can also have applications for any kind of algorithm that where you are manipulating LTL, right? Because we all know, I mean, when you look at propositional logic, right? You are using the conjunctive normal form all the time. Most tools will not even allow you to input anything that is not in conjunctive normal form. I think this may well happen, right? In a couple of years that the tools will tell you, no, either you transform it, please, into delta 2, or I will not even look at it.
And
So,
I think
and that's what we should have done, you know, in 85 or in 90. It's a pity that I think if Amir would have stayed with us for a couple of years, right, then he would have done this.
Thanks very much. We have a couple more questions. So Sanjeeva, please go ahead. Okay.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi, Javier. Fantastic talk. I really enjoyed it, and
thank you.
I think this is a profoundly satisfying result. I had a question. Am I right in understanding that none of the transformations, the syntactic ones, involve the next operator? So is that right? And if they don't, I mean, you don't use it. It's not a crucial crutch in your transformations.
No. So we deal with LTL with next operator. And,
yeah, no, I'm saying that if you didn't have a next, everything would still go through.
Yes, definitely, yeah.
Which is very interesting for us when we have to do abstractions and refinements.
Okay. Yes. That's actually a very good point. Yes, I hadn't thought about it when you are stuttering equivalent, right? Yes, that could.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Very good point. Yeah.
Thanks.
I should also say maybe if you are not bored by me or I'm not abusing your patience, let me go back to the beginning. Oh, takes forever. I don't have an easy way of doing it, or I am not finding it right away. Let me go back to here, to the definition, because actually you could have a subtle point that I am sure if you had spent 2 minutes, if you spend 2 minutes thinking about it, you will see. You could say, well, you are starting with the syntax, but if you take the usual definition of temporal logic, when you transform a form, so every formula has an equivalent formula in this syntax, and that's easy to see, but actually there can be an exponential blow up involved. So you may think, okay, you are cheating. You are using a syntax such that when I take the normal stuff, right, and I transform it into that, then there is an exponential blow up involved. Well, the way to avoid that is to also have the dual operators of until and weak until. So to have the release operator and to have the operator which is usually called M, and nothing changes. So I did this, I have restricted myself to until and weak until only exclusively for presentation purposes. In the paper, it is done with all operators and all results go through. So don't worry, if you take your favorite temporal logic syntax, you will be able to transform your formula into a formula in this syntax with actually linear blow up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Thanks.
yeah,
Thanks,
sorry
Javier.
for abusing maybe your.
So we have a final question from Carlos. Carlos.
Hey, thank you, Pablo. So thank you, Javier, for such a beautiful talk and a beautiful result. I really liked it. Story about myself is that the first paper I read in my life was a paper of you.
Oh.
The improvement of Macmillan's unfolding algorithm.
Right. So
for
at the age of 5
and data
or something.
It was some time ago. So it's interesting. So the question is really a small one, is do you see any parallel implementation of your normalization procedure to cope with the practical cost, computational cost of the transformation?
Well, yes. Okay, let's see if I can. Oh, I should have a way of doing this more efficiently. Maybe let me just do something a bit more dramatic. Right. So if I now go to the let me see. So if you see this normal form, or if you will see this this one, right, or this one, which is the final one. So you see this big disjunction, and probably you were already. This is what you were already guessing that one could do. It is, of course, the case that you can take these disjuncts. You can do compute these disjuncts in parallel. Okay, because this is, of course, an important point that you may have exponentially many, exponentially many cases here for M and N. In practice, of course, this is really not the case, but you may still have, let's say, 50 or 60 or I don't know, something like that, right? And then what happens is that many of those will give you that the disjunct is equivalent to true or to false. I mean, you will be able to, essentially that the disjunct is equivalent to true. So many of those will disappear in the final result, but you can compute that in parallel. Yeah, in principle, there is nothing preventing you to do that. By the way, let me point out, Salomon is in the audience, I think, and he has implemented the procedure. It's just a couple of hundred of lines of ML. I mean, it's very easy to implement. You can implement it in just one evening, right? So, and this already so Salomon maintains a very nice web page with different tools. And one of them now is the possibility, gives you the possibility to compute the normal form. And maybe Salomon is in the audience, maybe he can say how to, which is the best way to address, to find these tools. Is he, I don't know if he's in the audience.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
Hi.
So I guess the best way is just to go on my website, and on the bottom there's a tools section. Or you can also, yeah, I think that's the best way.
Okay, so we can do it. So this is your web page.
Yeah,
that's a bit weird. At the bottom. Which one do you want to go now?
It would be OWL.
Yeah, in OWL, and then where do you have the?
So there, bit up, and there is a link to the website where there's a tool, but there's also additional material for the paper, which is on the top. If you go in the list all the top, the LIX paper. And there
this is the LIX paper, and then there is
if you click on Java implementation, you directly get to the website where there is the implementation in Java, for example.
Okay, so here you have, you can download
like
normalization
it there. Java, and then there is. Okay.
So, you know, I told you that we needed a web interface for this. You know, I could have shown it later, right now. Okay, good. So there you can download the implementation. Okay.
Thank you so much. Okay, so let's just unmute ourselves and thank Javier again for this fantastic talk.
So thank you very much to everybody for being there on a at least here, very warm afternoon. And see you soon.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.
Okay.